How you doing?
Hey, all good?
Hello, everybody. I'm here. I'm Stephen Neville, CEO of BugHerd. We're here to talk about uh, two levers of running a profitable agency in a difficult market. I would normally say hello to people from around the world, but I'm assuming that it's pretty early in the morning in the US and very late in the evening here in Australia. That we're probably just dealing with people in the UK. Also, while we're here, we're talking to Rob Sayles, who's an agency advisor with over 25 years of experience in transforming agencies across the UK and the US. So I guess start with Rob before we get into topics and things. Be great if you could share a bit of your journey, your approach to helping agencies, and why we should be listening.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been, as you mentioned, in the industry for 25 years. I started in 97, came out of the music industry and into the fledgling internet industry way back when we were on dial-up modems. Um, I spent a good 10 years working in the agencies. Most roles ended up doing kind of COO and operations stuff. Um, Spent 8 years in corporate running a digital division for a big multinational insurer, which burnt me out, left me with adrenal fatigue, and came back to the agency scene. A couple of years ago, exited my own agency, which had been running successfully and profitably for 15 odd years, and started working as a consultant, helping other agency owners, founders, and leadership teams make the most of their business and get out of the weeds.
Excellent. Which is a great lead into what we're going to talk about today. It's a really interesting
Mhm.
journey that you've had. Personally, I'm running BugHerd now, but I've owned an agency, exited that agency as well, and know the challenges pretty well myself. So hopefully we can impart some value for people. But we're going to cover a couple of critical areas. So increasing client retention, effective upselling, and reducing operational costs and boosting productivity. So we have a lot to get through. We're going to try and share actionable insights so that people can kind of take things away that they can do, tomorrow. We'll have some dedicated Q&A time at the end, but if there are questions as people have, please chuck them in the Q&A and we will ask them as we go as well. But we'll also give a few minutes at the end for things that we don't get to. And as we have a lot to get through, let's just dive right in. So the first topic we've set is increasing client retention and upselling. And I guess I wanted to start that really. Why are we talking about, like retention and upselling as important for profitability versus acquiring new clients, which is often where people land?
Well, a couple of reasons. There's more energy required in acquiring new clients, and let's be really honest, we are right in the thick of a recession right now. Most agency owners out there will recognize that it is tough. It's really, really tough working with brands. Some agencies are flying, but they are the unicorns. Most of the rest of the industry is really struggling with its pipelines, its conversion rates. Pipelines are getting longer, opportunities are getting more difficult, competition's getting more fierce. So I've seen a fair few recessions. I've seen things like this happen before, but it seems to be a perfect storm that's going on. So why wouldn't you make the most of the existing opportunities that you have? That's not to say that you shouldn't be going out and looking for new clients and continuing to develop your pipeline, but actually making the most of what you've got is really important. And a lot of agencies forget this.
And so, like, I guess where do you start in that? Like, how do you better understand your clients, their behavior, preferences, value? How do you to get in closer relationships in that way?
Mhm. I mean, let's just go back to the kind of profitability point. It's typically 5 to 25 times more expensive to hire new clients than it is to, spend any amount of time nurturing existing ones. So there's a bigger cost, not just energy, but financially in marketing and sales development and all those kind of things. When it comes down to understanding your client's behavior and preferences, you've got a few different options, really. And this is something that you should do as part of your sales and marketing process, but also leaning into tools and systems that you might have. The obvious one is having a great relationship with a client. I mean, that's that should be a no-brainer. But what I tend to find when I'm working with agencies is you talk to the account managers about their relationship, the touch points and the conversations that they're having with existing clients, and it's pretty much non-existent. It's not always the case, but it's typically the case. The narrative or the communication that agencies quite often have with existing clients is when they're sending an invoice out, and that's it. And that's kind of not good enough. So on the one hand, you want to actually be looking at regular communication touch points, surveys, feedback, interviews, any mechanism that you can use with any client-facing member of your team to build an ongoing relationship with a client. Now, related to that, systems that you want to look at, if you haven't already, are CRM systems, classically. Where can you store information about the ongoing conversation that you're having with a client? So if you took a client out for a coffee and they said, well, we're thinking about doing this in Q1 next year, have you actually made a record of that somewhere centrally, not just in your own notepad or not in your head, but in a system? Some CRM systems now you can dovetail in emails so you can actually have threaded conversations which keep everything together in one place. But realistically, you want to be understanding the personal nature of the client individually, the overall nature of the business, where the client's head is at in their relationship with you, and also where there are potential opportunities that you don't want to hard sell, but you want to be aware of so that you can get on the front foot and start coming up with ideas for the client. And that's where the upsell opportunity will come from.
Yeah. You talked we use a phrase in I guess in SaaS now about you can't outrun your churn, because eventually your ability to acquire new customers, and if you churn at a certain rate, those two things will flatten you out as a business. So you have to be able to, like, your churn is the thing that will allow you to acquire new customers profitably over time. But you talked about kind of measuring the relationship there. You mentioned that, and I'm really quite interested in, like, how many people do you think actually, as agencies, in my experience, it's pretty rare for people to measure client satisfaction. Is that a thing that you see or hear, or is it a thing you recommend?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I would recommend. And there are tools that you could use, survey systems and feedback systems and CRM systems that you can put together to actually give you some data. But yeah, typically, if I'm sitting down and doing some early benchmarking with a client and I say, what's the feedback from your clients, they will give me some verbal narrative, which is typically an account manager or an account director protecting their role and saying that things are good and there's opportunities in the pipeline, but I can't clearly see it. Realistically, as a founder or a leadership team, what you would want to have is a very clear dashboard that says, here's all the pipeline opportunity and likelihood. Here's the narrative that's connected to them. This is the last time we spoke to the client. They want to follow up at this point, or we will follow up with them at this point. And here's the overall kind of temperature test of the relationship that we've got with a client. Again, if you've got that in one place, you can work out where your potential levers are. Back to your other point, if you acquire a new client in a difficult market and you make a margin of 5%, but it's cost you 25% to acquire them, are you actually making a loss? So this churn thing it can be really problematic.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, do you have key strategies on an individual client basis that people can take on to, or that you suggested this, that people can take on to address individual client needs, building better relationships, looking for kind of growth, upsell opportunities?
Yeah. So assuming that you've got some information together, whether it is scribbled down on a post-it or whether it's inside a CRM system, you want to actually start strategically spending some time looking at developing client persona. And that's the individual client that you have a relationship, but also their business. So this is working out, do they work seasonally? Are they affected by competition and market change? Are they affected by compliance? Are they affected by risk? Are they risk averse? Where are their budget cycles? When we look back, where were the growth points for them? All of those things you want to put together and start building individualized personas for the client so that you understand Sally is married, she's got kids, she works really hard, her birthday's on X. So there's the personal elements that you can use, building that relationship rather than being a commodity that's just seen as a cost line on their business budget makes a difference. But also knowing that perhaps if they're an e-com business and they're incredibly busy in Q4, well, the Q1 prior to the Q4, you should already have been building the relationship out so that you can work out if they need help with things, what that looks like, and proactively start making suggestions for that. Having all this data put together allows you to then queue yourselves up to be proactive rather than reactive. The last thing that you want is for a client to come to you and say, hey, we're doing this thing, we've got media buyers in, we're doing this thing next week, can you help us build a microsite? And you're like, we've got no capacity, this is going to be a major headache. Ideally, if you'd have planned ahead and had the conversation ahead and the account manager was working ahead, you could have made that happen in Q4 by planning it out in Q2.
Yeah, I think sometimes that relies on your clients to be know what's coming up in their in their pipeline too. Oh, sorry, in the, coming down the chain.
Well,
And,
it does. And to that point,
always is generally is that.
yeah, and to that point, I know we kind of cover it off in a sec. This is where agencies want to be augmenting themselves to become more strategic and more consultative. Um, if you can start to become more the business's partner that's thinking about them, that's thinking about the opportunity, that's thinking ahead, then again, you create more potential opportunity in your existing client pipeline by being on the front foot rather than just responding to things.
Yep. One of the things that reminded me of when I was on, I went and spent some time client side with some pretty large organizations as well. And having gone from agency, I worked for Publicis, I worked for RPG. Going client side and seeing how little of the marketing kind of person's job dealing with the advertising was. It was a very tiny part of their job, and understanding how much other stuff they have going on,
Yep.
and what they have to do and with the rest of their day. It was really, if I knew that, I would have been far better at understanding how, what was coming up for them and things like that. So getting really deep into those businesses, I think, is very important, as you've touched on.
And also the level. I quite often find that agencies are dealing with marketing middleweights inside, brands and corporates. So their clients effectively, the point of contact is the marketing person that's got the day-to-day job of having to do something. They're not doing it themselves in-house. They've hired an agency to do it. Again, does your account manager or account director have an opportunity to get upstream in the business and start talking to the marketing director or a head of department or somebody else that actually holds a bigger strategic picture? So rather than dealing just with the tactical, you're also aware of what the business is planning over the next 6 months, and you can make proactive suggestions for how you can support them.
We've got a quick Q&A question. I'll just chuck in. So, like in a market where client budgets are receding, conversions, sales for goods, services, multiple industries are down, how can agencies, depending on client budgets, shield themselves from the economic environment, which ties in kind of, I guess, fairly nicely to the next question I was going to ask you anyway. So I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of this is about how you play it. That's a bigger, broader question that was just asked then, which is, kind of more around profitability and sustainability. But how do you sell this stuff? How do you sell to an existing client? A lot of it will come back to your original scope of work. So when the client first engaged you, when they first onboarded, did you at that point actually get upstream and start to work out that there are more opportunities? Your focus would have been on doing a thing. So for example, it might have been to build a website or do some media buying for a particular campaign or whatever it is that your agency does. But could you see other opportunities sitting around that? Did you proactively, as you're going through the estimating process with your planning team, did you actually think, well, hang on a minute, there's another thing here. Now, it's not within scope here. We could talk to the client about it, but let's park that scope. Now, that phased scoping approach becomes part of your upsell opportunity. If you successfully deliver project A, and you can then proactively have a conversation with a client about an add-on or a new thing or something else that you identified but didn't really discuss with them at the time, you create a whole load of project opportunities for yourself that you can go back and talk to the client about.
To make that work, do you need to have a very clear idea, I guess, of the margins of your own services, various
Yes.
services in a way?
Yes. A lot of this comes down to your ability to actually deliver on time and budget. I mean, you're never going to upsell an existing client if you've, pardon my language, but if you pissed them off. Like, it makes it very, very hard. And this is why account managers, account directors, client services really struggle sometimes in their relationship with project managers and operations, because it's the reputation of those client-facing people, the account managers and client services. They're, or they should be, continuously building the relationship and creating a positive environment, you know, a good communication flow. It's very, very difficult for them. And you'll see this if you say to them, I'm really sorry, but the project's running late, or we've messed up, or the project's live, but it's now failing because we didn't load test it properly, or whatever else. They will suck through their teeth, quite rightly, because the months and months of legwork that they've done are just undone, and you're back to square one in the relationship. So trying to achieve a balance of profitability, reputation and quality, and ongoing client relationship, you know, that's the perennial struggle that agencies have. But you've got to be good at scoping and mapping your project out. You've also got to be really, really good at delivering it, because if you get those two things wrong, you're never going to have an opportunity with a client. The chances are they probably won't engage you again because they weren't happy with what you did last time.
Okay. Definitely. And so in a more tangible sense, can you give an example of like successful upselling strategy where you think someone's increased client retention, profit?
Yeah. So pretty much, obviously under non-disclosures, but maybe give you examples of stuff when I used to run my own agency. Scoping a project out, as I mentioned, being really, really clear on what the deliverables are, what the inclusions and the exclusions were, but also then parking some other opportunities. So this is what you're going to get for this budget on this time frame. Are you happy with it? Yes, let's on board. Let's do the paperwork. Let's get things started and resourced up. But there's also these other things that we could potentially do. So we were producing a lot of funnels and e-commerce type work, but we could spot the opportunity that once that thing was ready and live, there will be a need to increase traffic beyond organic social media by doing paid advertising. So we mentioned at the time, what are you going to do about media campaigns? Oh, we haven't really thought about that yet. We just want to get this thing done. Let's spend the next 3 months getting this stuff done, which is fine. But we were able to go back towards the end of a successful delivery because we were good at scoping, we were good at estimating, we'd got a good resource team, we knew what our margins were, our project management was tight, operationally we prioritized stuff, we made sure it went out the door to quality time, budget. And then we followed up with a conversation with them. Okay, well, now this is live, you know, let's leave it for a month. But in the meantime, why don't we sit down and do some planning for media buying? Because they were happy and we'd suggested something that they needed proactively. That conversation started. So project B initiated, and so on and so on and so on. So rather than just moving a client from a fixed project into a lowly retainer, you move a client from a phase 1 project to a phase 2 project, a phase 3 project, and go deeper and deeper inside their business.
And how do you keep, it seems very important in that scenario to make sure that everybody in the business is aligned to that goal. So I guess, like, how do you keep the team in touch with, you know, like all pulling in the same direction when it comes to that?
That comes down to your culture ultimately. You know, you've got to have a very open working environment where everybody can suggest improvement, where everybody's voice is heard. You know, a lot of that comes down to not just being in firefighting mode, but actually having the breathing space, the culture within the agency for anybody to say, I think there's a better way that we can do this, or I've got a problem with this, how are we going to resolve it? What you tend to find in cultures with most businesses is there's like a management hierarchy, which is quite controlling, where people can't say that there's a problem or can't suggest a better way of doing things. And if you haven't got those feedback loops and that kind of Kaizen style continuous improvement in place, then things won't improve. And that generally tends to be where projects start to fall apart, because people are embarrassed that the estimate that they put in isn't accurate, or they're embarrassed that their skills aren't actually up to scratch to get something done. You end up with middleweights and seniors having to come back into projects to rescue them. Project managers get stressed, account managers get stressed, the thing unravels. Well, actually, if you had an open communication and a better culture in the first place, some of those things would never have happened.
I agree with that a lot. But, that we struggle with the same things all the time. There's an excellent question here is, on average, what is the client churn rate for agencies that you coach? So is it higher than 20%? Does it change with service offering, i.e. digital marketing agency versus creative studios?
This is a tricky one.
I'm assuming that's an annual retention rate.
I hate this response, but I'm actually going to get a merch line produced which says it depends, and it does that. It does very much depend. I think whoever asked the question, some of the things that you just pointed out then are absolutely right. It very much depends on the specific service sector that the agency works in. So is it is it a data-driven agency? Is it a creative agency? Is it performance-driven? Is it doing whatever? And also who's it serving? What's the sector that it's serving, and what's its typical output look like? So, for example, e-commerce agencies tend to have quite a high churn rate if they can't successfully deliver, because it's fast-paced. The e-commerce sector has got a lot of variables. It's very fast-paced. It's highly competitive. Whereas if you were doing something creative like brand strategy, your churn rate is typically going to be lower, assuming that you can continue to attract clients or retain clients, because the project cycles are longer, they're not so time sensitive, and the variables are less. But I would say across the board, it's going to be between 10 and 20%, depending on agency's performance and sector that it's working in.
I will give a shout out to someone else's content in answer to this as well, is that there is a tool, agency analytics, based software, that does dashboards for reporting. They have a like benchmark report that I was literally looking at today that has some numbers in it around that. So if someone went looking for agency analytics benchmarking, something like that, I'm sure you'd be able to find it. And they'd surveyed a few hundred agencies and got some churn rate numbers, which would help answer that question as well.
Yeah, and in the UK, we've got a firm, consulting firm, I think, called Wow, that do a thing. They do the kind of annual reviews. I think they're just doing the surveys now. I can't remember whether they've released them or not, but yeah, you could get churn stats from a few different places.
Yeah, great. Is there any tooling in terms of kind of culture, suggesting that open culture and stuff? Any tooling you would suggest support culture, the culture of open communication, to help teams?
From a tooling point of view, I'm fairly agnostic. I mean, there are a few out there, but it's more about actually creating the time and leadership, creating the environment for people to talk to each other. So rather than running back to back on projects, making sure that your weekly resourcing profile has actually got project huddles and overall team huddles that do focus on 360, completely unbiased, completely uncontrolled feedback mechanisms. Because that's where you want to get a unified vision. That's where you want to actually make sure that everybody's talking to each other. Training sessions for that kind of stuff as well. The thing that really surprises me with most agencies is there are very few internal projects inside their resourcing profiles or their production systems. And I'm thinking, but there's a whole load of stuff that you need to do as a business to keep things moving. Why are you not resourcing and potentially prioritizing internal projects like training sessions, communication sessions, innovation labs, all those kind of things? And it's typically because the agency's grown organically, it's always serving clients, and it never actually serves itself.
Yeah, I think it also, remember, you're paid for time. And so when someone is not working for time, it's effectively a double cost, in a way. So that, is often a barrier in that scenario, but doesn't decrease Chris, the importance. One of the best successes we've had in terms of culture was moving from longer term, sorry, kind of less frequent one-on-ones, as in monthly, to weekly catch-ups. So you just, everybody gets a weekly catch-up. It means everything is talked about at the time rather than, you know, disappearing. When things come up, they're captured rather than kind of disappearing, becoming bigger, you know, being forgotten about, all of that. So it's often about people management. Look, want to move on because we do have a lot to get through. Summary of first half, I guess, is what are 3 things that you can do tomorrow or an agency can do tomorrow to improve their client retention?
So 3 things. First one is get a client feedback system in place, or review the client feedback system that you've got. Is it a survey system? Is it an account manager taking them out and schmoozing them once a month? Like, what is that system, and how do you get information back from it? So make sure that you've got one, that it's robust, and that information from it, whatever it may be, can be put in some central place to be evaluated. Number 2, think about personalization and segmentation. You know, what is it about each of your clients that's different? Have you actually considered putting together some kind of persona, some personality profile for them, so that you know how to address them, you know what makes them tick, you know strategically where they need to be, and you can communicate in the right way for them? What you'll find is certain project managers, CS or account managers, might work better with certain clients depending on the personality match. So again, make sure that you've looked at that. And I guess the third one, to your point there, Steve, is do weekly huddles with your team. You know, actually have the account manager or have the CRM system and review the information, get the team together and talk about the opportunities, make sure that everybody's actually got a voice. Has your junior developer, for example, spotted something that your senior account director hasn't? And is that a true viable business opportunity? The only way that you're going to know that is by having some kind of culture or some kind of in-house communication protocol that allows everybody to talk to each other. The only way that you're going to do that is by making time for it.
I agree with that a lot. Excellent. Great. So we're going to change gears a little bit and move into, I guess, second half, which is really around, you know, how we go about reducing operational costs and increasing productivity at the same time, because that's what we want, you know, given the market we're in. So, you know, again, it's a fairly challenging topic, but what are the most common challenges you see with agencies when it comes to, you know, operational efficiency, improving operational efficiency?
I think the number one is just unclear central information. Like I'm talking about tool gaps or tool overlaps or poor tool usage. You know, you've got a central production management system, but you've got account managers and project managers still using Excel sheets, for example. You know, there are Google Drives all over the place. You haven't got a clear handle on what it is that you're meant to be doing and what the latest piece of information is on a client or a project or whatever else. So poor tool usage, non-standard use of data tends to be the number one thing that impacts operational efficiency. The other thing, though, is things like org profile, roles, responsibilities, those kind of things. You'll find inside a project team that assumptions will be made about who's meant to be doing what and who's got the skills and capability to do what. And this is where you find that projects sometimes fail because somebody assumed that somebody else was going to do something and they were going to do it well, and that all the jigsaw pieces of the project would come together, not actually understanding the roles and responsibilities across the team or within the project can lead to inefficiency. Typically, something gets dropped or somebody has to come in to rescue something. And, you know, agency owners over and over again will tell me that senior management or heads of department need to get helicoptered in to fix certain problems. And that's typically indicative of the fact that you didn't scope it out very well, or you gave it to somebody that was incapable of actually doing the work. So roles and responsibilities are really important. And I suppose the biggest one, the big picture, is resource management. You know, how's operation actually handling the resources? You are like air traffic control. trying to land all these different planes simultaneously across multiple projects with a finite set of people. How are you prioritizing and making sure that you're doing the right thing at the right time? So tools, people, and resourcing are normally the three very big areas where agencies tend to trip themselves up.
You touched you touched on kind of spreadsheets all over the place, which I have to talk about us for a second. In that we find a lot of people who join or sign up for BugHerd are coming from using spreadsheets, particularly to kind of manage often very complex e-commerce builds or website builds over multiple markets and multiple languages, and or down to smaller things as well. But the spreadsheet is not fit for purpose in that scenario, and so it actually just adds a huge amount of complexity to the job when it's intended to be simple. But a lot of a lot of information gets lost, and time goes on. Time goes with that information because you've got to call the client and all of that stuff. So yeah, there's a bit about kind of tooling that's fit for purpose as well.
Yeah, very much.
And so as a process audit, kind of to start with, like identifying some of these, is there any process audit techniques you found most effective in identifying areas for operational efficiency, cost reduction?
Yeah, I mean, typically it's going to come down to having all the information in a central place and starting with a financial audit. Now, a lot of agencies will have finance directors or CFOs, potentially, depending on the size. Some smaller agencies might only have, accountants or bookkeepers that are looking after the basic financials. But good operations and efficiency comes down to knowing your numbers. So you want to be making sure that you've set some key KPIs or OKRs for the business. Is it, for example, delivery margin per project? Is it overall margin and profitability? If you know what you're looking for and you've got your financial information centrally, you can actually start looking through that and working out things like, is it when we do these kind of projects that we regularly hemorrhage our margin? Is it when we use this resource on these kind of projects that we regularly overrun? Is it certain types of clients where we're over-servicing them or where we're not using project management to clearly reinforce the boundaries of the scope, that we regularly create our problems? And then the other things that a good financial person can do, and that's what I'm saying, with accountants and bookkeepers, it's slightly more difficult because they might not be considering thinking strategically, is looking at leading indicators financially, like forecasting things. If this happens, we need to do this. We need to look at our cash flow. We need to be looking at our debt management. We need to be looking at likelihood and revenue inside our pipeline, all of those kind of things. Getting a balance between what's going on now, what's happened historically, and where you need to put yourself in the next 6 months will give you opportunities to start potentially reducing cost. Does it mean that you need to streamline your resource profile over the next 6 months? Perhaps you need to sack a few people and look at actually bringing in some freelancers and contracts to cover basic resourcing needs. Can you reprofile your debt? Can you be having better conversations with clients about more strategic projects with bigger budgets, which is going to help your cash flow over the next 3 months, for example? So that operational and finance audit is the place that you want to start, because it will give you cold, hard numbers, and it will give you forecast numbers that you can sit down and start to work out what your next moves are going to be.
And an excellent question from the audience here is, having observed that internal teams are often unhappy with external audits in general, how do small agencies maintain their culture and people feeling like they're being trusted when running audits with people like you?
It's a great question. And it's a real problem. Whether you are doing an audit yourself, so whether it's you as a founder working with your finance person and just running the numbers, or whether it's getting a consultant to come in and kick the tires, the last thing that you want is for this idea of policing, because it gets people's backs up, and that's not good for the culture. So again, it comes down to people actually understanding the value of this kind of stuff. Have you explained to your team the value of timesheeting? Have you explained to your team, or the project managers, the importance of variance analysis? Have you explained to the account managers and CS the importance of actual accurate pipeline revenue numbers? All of these things matter. But if you've got people that are just clocking in and clocking out, and they don't understand how this thing over here relates to them here and relates to the fact that on the 28th of the month they'll get a paycheck. If there isn't that transparency in actually how the business operates, and people don't take the time to understand or communicate that to each other, then you will naturally get to a point where it's like, why is this guy kicking the tires on our processes? Why is he looking at that stuff and screwing his face up and saying, this is problematic? Like, the business should have internally communicated the value of all of this stuff. So again, it's important for leaders to, within reason, work out how they communicate that all of these things connect together. So the junior developer actually has an active a part in the business as the founder.
I certainly was never one to enjoy timesheeting in my career.
It's bane of most agencies' lives. In fact, it's any service business. But effectively, if you think about it, it's a lagging indicator. It shows you what happened if it's done consistently, and if it's measured against whatever it was that the task actually was. That's where your variance analysis can come from. But as a lagging indicator, it can show you whether you got your estimates right, whether the person was actually skilled to do the job, whether there was over servicing somewhere. There's a whole load of historical questions that you can ask in debriefs and post-mortems that will allow you to build a better plan for the future. But when it comes down to the team, Friday afternoon, hammering away 7.5 hours like monkeys into a timesheet system is of no value to anybody, because it's not accurate. They're just doing it because they've been told to do it. If you can gamify it or explain why it's valuable and make sure that you give them the 5 minutes every day to keep on top of it, then you get information that's useful, because people understand its value and people are bought into it and they're accountable for it.
So another question from the audience. So what are some common pitfalls companies face when trying to optimize processes to reduce operational costs, and how can they avoid them?
Over-engineering or doing too much too soon. It should be incremental. You should look at the smallest thing that you can do that's part of a big move that you want to make, and make that move on a weekly basis. So, for example, if you want to completely overhaul the way that you handle retainers, because you know that your project managers are over servicing, you haven't got a handle on the number of hours that you're actually burning versus the contracted hours that you should be spending. You don't want to rip an entire system out and replace it with something else. You want to work out what's the smallest thing that we can identify that we can improve as part of a big picture of 10 steps that we're going to take over the next month. I've seen too many agencies just go, right, let's take all of this stuff out. And it becomes so overwhelming that people get stressed out. It gets in the way of the day job. It's like pulling on the handbrake on a motorway. You just do this massive skid and nobody particularly enjoys the experience. So I think the important thing is to identify what the dials are and what you need to do next that you could realistically do in a week and see a positive improvement from.
Okay. How does talent management contribute to agency profitability, operational efficiency? So I guess my question there is also about, part of what you've got to do is acquire talent as well. You've got to get people to come and work in the, your agency, because agencies all deal with reasonably high staff churn. It's part of the, part of the business of working very hard is people move on. And, so you're trying to retain people through culture and also get people to come and work at you in a market where you're also trying to kind of reduce operational costs or, get efficiency burns. Like how do you straddle that balance?
I mean, the key point there is you don't necessarily need to hire A players if you've got, to internal projects, a good learning and development plan in place internally. There are agencies that I've worked in agencies that I've worked for as a consultant, where we've hired talent from completely outside the industry because the personalities, the culture fit, their way of thinking, the softer skills were more valuable than their ability to, for example, be a project manager. So we hired military or architectural project managers because they had a certain way of doing things that would actually be quite valuable. Obviously, they then need training internally to understand the industry, to understand the products and services and all the rest of it. But because we had an internal project that had a learning and development plan in place, we could make those moves. If you're on fire as an agency, you ain't got the time to be doing internal projects as well. And this is where the pinch comes for a lot of agencies, where they can't work out how to get A players attracted to the business, but at the same time, they can't, clearly train somebody up or upskill them to behave in a certain way. The key thing is you want to be linking the development of a person to some kind of productivity metric. So if you can set a weekly metric, which is, for example, with a developer, amount of tasks successfully delivered to quality and budget, or if it's a project manager, amount of projects delivered in a month to X delivery margin. You set that and you review it. And rather than having the horrific annual reviews that most businesses have, which I, as a member of the team, sit on one side of the table, you, as a founder, sit on the other side of the table, and we've both got opposing views on what the hell's going on. I want more pay. You don't want to pay me. And in a year's time, I'll either walk or something else. If I was working with my line manager and with the founder or HR person or a talent manager on a weekly basis to go, hey, how's it going? Did you hit these targets that you were meant to hit this week? Did you do your timesheet? Did you get the task done on time? Did we actually hit the margin on this project? Yes, we did. Great. Right. The next move is going to be this thing. Oh, and by the way, the fact that you've hit all these goals month in, month out, when we sit down in 2 months' time and have your next performance review, we can seriously talk about that 10K wage increase that you want. So again, it's getting away from the archaic corporate structure and thinking more flexibly about things.
Yep, definitely. Okay, I'll go back to the audience. Well, it's another great question here, which is in our agency, we often see clients unhappy because some of the account managers leading them on. So to say that, but the AMs are under the pump with the founder putting so many accounts on their portfolio, meaning, it's a founder, each client gets maybe a fraction of the time that they would expect because the account management layer has too much on effectively. They're trying to get too much done. Which is a leadership issue. So how do you educate as a team member? How do you educate the leadership to understand that as well, that you're under and that layer of team can't take more on. It's they're stretched, and that actually impacts client relationships and client retention over time.
Again, the important thing is to decouple the personality and the emotion from the situation. If you, as an account manager, go and talk to your leadership team and say, hey, I'm massively overwhelmed. I'm really, really struggling with this stuff. I don't know what I'm meant to do about it. I feel like I'm dropping the ball and all the rest. There's a personal element to that. If you go and talk to the leadership team with a report or some data that says, because I am working 15 clients concurrently, I can see from the CRM that our pipeline's getting fractured. The conversation that I'm having with the clients isn't as deep as it would need to be. I'm struggling to actually get a handle on the project throughput and the deliverables, and the project manager's telling me that the margin is decreased by this. You've got some stuff that, assuming that your founders or your leadership team actually understand metrics, you've got some stuff that you can talk to them about without necessarily being emotional or feeling, like you've got a personal vested interest in this. Typically, across agencies, if a single project manager or a single account manager is dealing with more than 6 clients or major projects simultaneously, you're in trouble. Realistically, an account manager that wants to go deep, and if there's an opportunity with a client where there's lots and lots of different pieces of scope that you could play with, maybe an account manager only wants to have 3 client relationships going on at the same time. So again, it's going to come to the numbers, but I would advise in that case, if you were going to be communicating with the leadership team, get some information together that actually shows them what the current problem is and what your suggested solution would be.
Excellent. Similarly, let's wrap it up there. I guess is part of it. If anyone has any further questions, I'm just going to ask Rob one more question. Chuck them in the Q&A now, because we'll just do a quick run through of them now. But as a summary, I guess, of the operational efficiency component, what are the 3 things that you know the agency can do tomorrow to reduce costs, improve efficiency?
Yeah. So map out your core processes as best you can and as quickly as you can, and look for where there are pinch points. Set up a task list of 3 things that you could do next week that would make a positive improvement. So whether it's opening up communication or getting everybody to put their information into a timesheet system or something else, like make those incremental weekly changes, and book some internal time to actually talk to the team about things like personal development, skills development, or identifying operational improvements that could be made. Get that culture and communication actually flowing, because it could be that your junior developers got the best idea in the world, but nobody's ever asked them.
Excellent. Well, thank you. If anyone else has questions, chuck them into the Q&A now. We do have one, which is, how do you overcome client resistance to your agency upselling?
Well, the trick there is not to sell at all. I know that sounds completely counterintuitive, but if the relationship is strong enough, if you have identified an opportunity or they have expressed a need, you don't need to necessarily be selling them. If you've done a great job delivering something previously and you can show them and inspire them without influencing them, twisting their arm, or sending them a proposal, that you know what needs to be done next to support the business, then the conversation will naturally flow. If a client is resistant, chances are their mate owns an agency and you're just on the books to kind of tick a box, or it could be that they see you as a commodity, like the relationship's not deep enough. It could be that they're already looking around. It could be that you get thrown into a pitch situation. Again, all of those are potentially avoidable if you've got a deep enough personal relationship with a client.
You've mentioned centralizing information to drive reporting, general visibility. Are there any specific tools, project agency management, that you see really working well? Chris here uses a tool called Hive, but would be interested in your experience of alternatives.
Yeah, and I'll put the invisible merch back on and say it depends. But again, if you want something that's got project management, it's got CRM functionality, it's got great reporting, it can connect to financial systems, potentially it's got some AI in there, a language learning model that can use technology to start to streamline certain things or make proactive suggestions. You probably want to be looking at something like Scoro or Forecast or Productive. They're all production management systems that agencies use that are very robust and fairly flexible. Put together a features list for yourself of what you need, and then go and do some trials and demos with various platforms and see whether it ticks the box. Keep in mind that you need to be extensible. If your team grows, can the system cope? If you end up with a remote office, can the system cope? All of those things need considering. Plus there's data migration. If you're on an existing system and you're looking at something else, how are you going to get all your data together? A lot of these bigger production management service providers do concierge service, so they'll actually help you with the migration planning for your existing data, including scraping Excel spreadsheets from an account manager's private Google Drive if that's what's needed.
Excellent. So we touched on this a bit earlier, but just as a final wrap up, I guess, is how can a business identify and prioritize most valuable growth areas for individual clients to develop customized strategies that maximize both client satisfaction and profitability?
Yeah, I mean, that's partly going to come down to looking at yourself as an agency and working out the projects where you have delivered on time, on budget, and also team satisfaction. You know, did the team enjoy working on it? Did you do it well? Like that's the first tick box. If the team's happy with it, the team loves the client, and the project was done really well, that's a move in the right direction. And then it's down to the account director, the account manager to get a temperature test from the client as to whether there are opportunities, whether there is ongoing scope, whether the client's actively looking, and also tied in with your financial forecast and your leading indicators. We need something in the next 3 months. Well, this client's talking about something Q3 next year. Maybe we should keep the ball rolling, but not put quite so much attention on ongoing conversation with that client. So there's going to be a few different factors at play, but if you put that all together in a report, it should give you, you know, a top 3 list of clients that you really love, they really love you, they need something in a relatively short time frame, it matches with your financial forecasting, right, hell for leather. Let's go and talk to them.
All right, excellent. Well, given time, we'll wrap it up there. I guess in terms of as a quick summary, we said kind of first part talking about how we increase client retention, effective upselling, your 3 tips to take away, client feedback system, personalization, and weekly huddles and catch-ups, and then reducing operational costs, boosting productivity. We have audit process. I can't read my writing for the second one here. And then the third one was culture and communications. So I'll let someone go back and watch the video to fill in the second point there. Overall, thanks very much, Rob. Really enjoyed the conversation. And as we finish this, anyone still around, you'll get a quick feedback survey. Will pop up in the browser. We'd love you to fill it in. You have the opportunity to contact myself and Rob as well. Get our contact details. We're after feedback because we want to improve future sessions. Recording of the webinar will be made available over the next week or so. And thank you everyone for your time, and have a great day, and good night for me because it's getting late here in Australia. So
Cheers, Steve.
thanks, Rob. Really enjoyed the chat, mate.
Take care.